The main water shutoff was what's called CPVC, which is pretty brittle. And that literally snapped. it snapped. And the student came home and he's like, there's water all over. And I'm like, water all over where? He's like, the entire unit. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, there's like 3 or 4 inches of water everywhere. I was like, oh my God.
Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach. And this is the show to help you build a thriving rental property business so you can get out of the financial grind and do more of what matters. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, thank you for being back for another episode. The title of this episode is 21 Commonly Forgotten Rental Property Maintenance Tasks. So after popular demand, I'm bringing back on Scott Dixon from Everyday Home Repairs. And together we are going over something called a rental property maintenance checklist. So this is a checklist that he and I have been working on behind the scenes. We've put together and it's going to be available to you. You can download it in the show notes if you look on your podcast app, or if you're watching it on YouTube, you can look in the video description. I'll have a link right there below the description so you can download this checklist. This is a work in progress. We'd love your feedback on this. But in this episode, we go in depth, step by step over these different things that you should check on and you might forget with your rental property. We talk about maintenance, why you should do maintenance, how it makes you money, how it saves you money over the long run, and how it gives you a rental property that your tenants will love, that'll keep them coming back, and that'll make your life a lot less stressful. So maintenance is an important topic. It doesn't get enough love in the podcasting and YouTube world for real estate investing. But in today's episode, we're going to go over a tool that you can use to have excellent property maintenance for your rental property. Whether you have one rental property or a lot of rental properties, this will be very helpful. But before we get to today's interview, it's time for the weekly behind the scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on with me behind the scenes at my real estate investing and my business. And I'm going to keep this relatively short because this is a long, in-depth episode, but something in 2023 I'm going to be focusing a lot on, not only in my own businesses, but also sharing with you, is the importance of systems. So if you want to build a rental property business, or really any business that runs well and it runs without you in some cases, you can outsource it to other people. Like I'm living in Spain and I have rental properties back at home and I spend a couple hours per week on most weeks maintaining my business, not maintaining the properties themselves. And that happens because of two things: because of people, because of systems. So I've hired really good property managers and contractors and people on the ground, but I also have systems. And today's episode is all about one particular important system called a maintenance checklist. But I want to encourage you to build checklists and processes throughout your business. And if you want some help, some offline reading, I actually wrote about this in my book that's coming up later this year called The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investors. So stay tuned for that. I have a whole chapter on systems and processes and technology. But in the meantime, I read a really good book called The E-Myth. And I read that right when I started my business. It talks a lot about systems and how to systematize your business. So if you want some offline reading to start on that right away, check out The E-Myth. It's a great book and I highly recommend it. With all that said, now it's time to get to the interview with Scott Dixon. Hey, Scott, welcome back to the podcast.
What's up, Chad? How are you, man? I'm excited to talk a little bit more maintenance. This is my day in, day out. This is what I eat, sleep, and breathe.
I love it. Well, this is back based on popular demand. We had an interview with you earlier in 2023. All the comments were like, more. We want more of this stuff. And I'm loving it too. Like I love digging into the details of rental property maintenance. It's just the bread and butter. It's the everyday stuff that you do as a rental property investor. So today, for everybody listening, we're going to go deep on a very practical tool called a rental property maintenance checklist. So Scott and I behind the scenes have been going back and forth, and we've worked off of a maintenance checklist that Scott has for his channel, Everyday Home Repairs, for your home that you live in. And we've tweaked this, and I've added some of my own thoughts based on my experience to create a maintenance checklist that you can use. And by the way, it'll be a link in the show notes today. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the video description. So you can download that, you can use it, you can tweak it, give us feedback, leave comments about it. We'd love to hear if we're missing something, if there's something else we need to add or something to change on there. But the point is, as you're listening to this today or watching it, download that, follow through, and this will be the tool that we're using to talk about how to maintain your rental property. But before we get there, we're going to jump in really quickly For those who haven't heard of you, Scott, who haven't watched the other episode, maybe you could give the 1 minute version of who you are and how you got into this maintenance and real estate thing.
Right. So small but mighty investor. So I actively have my own portfolio that I do everything on. So I lease it, I'm managing it, and I'm most importantly maintaining it. So I will maintain about 90% of anything that comes through. Every once in a while, I will hire it out. So that's 9 different units. So 5 properties, 9 different units. And then now I'm doing more and more of a passive position investing. So investing with others, they are taking on the operations, and then I'm more in a passive position. But really where this ties in and where I'm building my experiences, for about 5 years now, I've had a YouTube channel called Everyday Home Repairs. So that started off literally in my first rental property, a loose toilet paper holder, and I needed to fix it. So I documented that. That was my first video ever, I think December something 2017. So that's where it all started, and just published our 316th normal long form YouTube video, a bunch of shorts out there. We have Facebook presence. We have a website, Instagram. So it's really growing, exciting to help homeowners. So really focusing on homeowners, helping them do DIY, helping them save time and money by taking a little bit more ownership. And then that obviously dovetails right into a small but mighty investor, because often you're doing some similar things.
Absolutely. And I'm a fan of your channel. I'm a subscriber. When I do every once in a while have to do some maintenance at home, I'm checking out Scott's channel, or my rental property maintenance. Actually, when I have somebody calls and says, hey, this is something we need to do, I'm like, what would Scott do in that situation? Let me go check this out. Yeah. So great. It's a great resource. Thank you again for coming back on. I want to jump right into this topic. We're going to get into this checklist. We're going to go down the list, but I want to start sort of with the bigger picture, because we're talking to real estate investors. We're both real estate investors. And I know I'm going to speak from experience. I was an inexperienced maintenance repair person. And in many ways, I'm still learning a lot. And I feel like one of the weaknesses I had as a real estate investor, some people jump in and they're just really good at handyman work. That was not me. Like, I was not that person. I was better at the negotiating, the financing. That was kind of my strength. And so the maintenance, I've had to catch up a lot, and I made a lot of mistakes. And one of the mistakes that I want to get your opinion on here, Scott, is we're going to talk about the benefits of maintenance. Mm-hmm. What I've noticed the trend with a lot of real estate investors is under investing their time and their money into maintenance of their properties. And so this is sort of a general question. You see investors just say, well, I'll just put that off. I'll wait until 5 or 10 years from now. Why would I need to do that regular preventative maintenance thing? It costs too much money. Mm-hmm. And so I'd love to hear your just general idea about the value of maintenance. Why is it valuable to do regular, ongoing preventative maintenance, not just fixing the things that the tenant calls about and says it's a problem, but actually like proactively fixing things, looking at things, checking on things beforehand?
Yeah. So I guess going back to your strengths before we jump into that. So your strength, underwriting deals, finding off market deals, getting enough wiggle room on those monthly expenses so that you can actually put in your 8% maintenance and a 5% CapEx or whatever it is, depending on the age of the property and what you're dealing with. If you purchase the deal and you're talking yourself into the deal, right? So you're trimming down your maintenance to 3%. You don't even know what CapEx is, because roofs do go out, HVAC systems do go out, right? These big ticket items, and you're talking yourself into the deal and you purchase it. So you're just barely covering PITI, your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. If you're in those situations, then you don't want to know anything about maintenance, right? It's like your head's in the sand. You're like, do not tell me anything about this because you don't have the budget for it. So believe it or not, the finding deals, purchasing deals, and doing that right sets you up for a solid maintenance plan. Because if you don't purchase correctly, there's a small likelihood that you're going to be proactive on spending more money up front to try to mitigate any larger issues down the road. So the purchase side is super important for your maintenance schedule. Then, because you purchase correctly, now let's get ourselves on somewhat of a schedule. if you are not the trusted advisor, I consider myself the glue guy. So I might not do all the HVAC, I might not do all the plumbing, but when that call comes in and the issue comes in, I can piece all those together. And I have enough experience that I can kind of be the first line of defense, decide if I'm going to do that myself, if I'm going to hire it out, and who do I need? If you don't have that experience, you do need a trusted advisor. Because very often, especially in the larger issues, when you have a leak in a water heater and it not only do you need that water heater swapped out, but now your subfloor and your floor is damaged, right? So you might have drywall damage, you might have painting. So now all of a sudden you need 2 or 3 different trades that you need to put together. And if you don't really have a basis there on how that works, there's an order of operation. How do I schedule these? Who do I call first? A plumber is not going to do your flooring and your drywall and your painting.
In fact, you do not, you want to run if they offer to do your drywall or your any of that
right?
stuff.
But that's, I mean, when you're starting off, that's what you kind of think. You're like, you know infinitely more than me. So they literally install your water heater and you'll go back and you'll see your drywall and your floor and you're like, who's going to do this? So yeah, you need that trusted advisor. If you are not experienced or not growing your experience, you really want that player that you can lean on and they're going to help you through those situations.
Is that your property manager, a general contractor? Who would you think who could be that trusted advisor?
Yeah, in the past, some people kind of harp on home inspectors a little bit. I think that's because their expectations for a home inspection is that they will see through every wall, they will see every issue within the next 15 years, and that's maybe a little unrealistic. Home inspectors have a role, a very valuable role, and if you can find a good one, which I have in the past, you can sometimes lean on that home inspector and see if they're willing to do consulting, do maybe some pre-inspection before a move-in, a move-out inspection, right? So they can kind of be that person because that's what they do day in, day out. And the nice thing that I like about that is they're separated from the actual work, right? So often when you call in a trade, they're going to get you across the finish line. They're going to say it's done. Now, was everything checked off? Is that going to, be that fix that you think is going to last you another decade? Sometimes that's, can cause some issues. So it's nice to have that kind of third party that's a little bit separated from the process and they're just using their experience. What do I see? And they're not having to come back to fix it. So they don't have kind of that little bit of conflict that you sometimes can run into.
No, that's such a good advice. I hadn't thought about it that way. I used inspectors on all my purchases now, even today. Like I've crawled under thousands of crawl spaces now, but I still hire an inspector. But I hadn't thought about it for the follow-ups. Like that really makes sense to me, where you could have them come in and even on a regular basis, if you were going to do annual inspections, you could have them kind of follow up. And it's almost like if they had a record of it and they knew the property pretty well, it would be pretty easy to follow up and look for the old things they found and all that. So that's very good advice. All right. So this is a little bit of a tangent. We're going to get to the maintenance checklist, but this is good stuff. I want to go back to the value of maintenance. I'm going to give you a specific example because this is one that I think comes up a lot. You have a heating and air system, furnace, boiler, whatever the case might be. And that's a pretty obvious one where it's really expensive to have to replace that. And there's this idea that you can, it's going to be on the checklist that we're going to go over to clean it, to service it, to do something to it on an annual basis. Is there value in that? So if you had to pay somebody $150 to come out and clean it and do that, are you going to get your money back by doing that regular investment of preventative maintenance, ongoing maintenance? Yeah,
100%. So the nice thing about those, so there's a few things within maintenance where it's actually kind of at cost. So HVAC companies are not making much off those yearly maintenance, usually. That is just a great marketing funnel into their business, right? So if they're out there and they're slapping their sticker on your ductwork, so you remember to call them, and they're doing the check for you. Well, the nice thing is that's actually at cost. So the labor, the truck, everything they got invested, they're not making a ton of money off you. So you're actually getting a pretty darn good value on those yearly checklists. And again, if they're a trusted advisor, so you want to look at reviews, you want to get references, that is, I think, good money spent to avoid I'm in Illinois, right? So we can have a negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit cold burst coming through and furnaces are going out left and right. And if you are a remote landlord fending for yourself and you have no relationships with an HVAC company and the whole town's abuzz with HVAC issues, good luck. It's kind of a nightmare, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's not only the value, and it's a pretty low cost service to have them come and clean your coils and do some of the stuff we're going to talk about, but you also have this relationship where you can call them. If you have an electrician, you have a heating and air person, a plumber, all these trades, if they regularly look at them, then you now, again, it's kind of like your car mechanic. It's kind of like, I was thinking about your dentist. I had a lot of dentists in my family. They do your teeth cleaning every year and they do your x-rays, and you might go 3 years with no problems. Then you have a problem, a cracked tooth. Now they have your x-rays. They know what's going on.
For sure.
So that's the premise of this conversation. I just want everybody to think about this as real estate investors. I know how the mentality is that we're trying to save money. We're trying to be frugal. We're trying to make cash flow on paper. But I loved your point at the beginning, Scott, that having a good deal in the first place is probably the best way to spend money and to get on a good maintenance schedule. So if you have the cash flow there to spend it, then you're not looking for dollars here and there, trying to save money and putting off maintenance that should be getting done. So such a good point.
Yeah, and especially within the community, right? So I think it's not looked at as something that really drives your real estate investing career, but I would challenge that, honestly, that deal flow. So obviously deal flow, finding those 70 cents on the dollar, 80 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar, depending on the market. Availability of capital, right? Availability to actually purchase those, get your good financing against them. But if you have a good maintenance schedule, if you stay on top of your things, that is, for most people, a stress reducer. So that lightens the load mentally that you have daily. This is something we think about daily, at least most of us, right? So if you are on top of your maintenance, it's going to reduce your stress and superpower your energy of wanting to go get more deals, wanting to expand your portfolio. So I know sometimes it can be something we don't want to really address, but don't forget, a lot of that stress in your mind that's kind of limiting you on what you want to do, and maybe you want to get out of the game, that could be definitely maintenance related. And you could have got bit by a roof leak that then got into the attic, and now you're doing insulation and drywall and painting. And yeah, so don't underestimate the power of having a plan here.
Yeah, most emergencies. Now, there are some real emergencies. A tornado came through town, a hurricane, but most emergencies, in my experience, have been something I could have prevented if I would have caught that leak earlier, if I would have changed out that thing that I could have changed out earlier. So 100%. I'm in agreement. I want to make sure people think about that. We are going to be all over maintenance in 2023 because it's such a big part of being a successful real estate investor. Mm-hmm. So that being said, let's jump into this rental property maintenance checklist. Scott, you ready? You ready to go down the list?
Let's do it. Yep.
So for everybody listening or watching, we're going to go season by season. I love that about Scott's checklist. It kind of has just a chronological flow to it. And I'm going to be the kind of play-by-play announcer. I'm going to go down the list, and then I'm going to turn it over to Scott to explain what it is. Some cases they'll be pretty self-explanatory. Other cases they'll need a little bit more explaining. And I'm going to start in every season. So we're in the spring season to start. Every season, there's some regular things that you pretty much want to do every single quarter when possible. And so I'm going to start with that, Scott, the regular maintenance items in the spring. And we're going to start with the check the smoke and the carbon monoxide detectors to see if they're working.
Yeah. So batteries. Batteries go out. So you do need to understand, do you have one that has 3 AA's or a 9-volt battery? A lot of them are changing now to like an integrated sealed lithium ion battery. And then those are basically good for 10 years. And then that aligns with the shelf life of a smoke detector or a carbon monoxide smoke combo. So there is actually a shelf life on your detectors. That's something you should know. They are not good forever. So usually that 10-year window is it. And so if you're getting those sealed units, they should be good. for that serviceable life. And then you actually need to get a new unit.
Good reminder. So this is an aside, and this applies to, I think, all of these things, but how do you track when you have 10 properties, for example, and you're trying to track the lifespan of things? So we've got a smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, 5 to 10 years. We've got appliances that have 5 or 10 years. Do you have some kind of log system or maintenance system where you write, how do you track this stuff as we're going through it?
Yeah. There's kind of ends of the spectrum. So one end of the spectrum is just a Google Sheet. I like a Google Sheet because I can also share it with multiple others. So I'm doing more midterm rentals now. So I have like battery swap outs on August, door locks and these type of thing. When was the last time we did that? Because those go out every like 3 months. So you got to stay on top of those. Furnace filters. So I just have a tab for each of those categories. And then I have, one column is the property. Maybe if I have multiple battery locations, what is that? So if you had multiple smoke detector locations, you would put those in there and then just document your dates on there. That's on the low end. I think that's approachable for anybody and just a good practice to get into. And then there's some new players coming out that are pretty new to me as well, things I'm investigating more, but like Inspectify. Inspectify is a company that's trying to kind of bring the inspection industry into more of a modern age and using a lot of the cloud-based systems. So I know they are something where you can reach out and use their system and have those documents stored on your purchase inspection. But then they also have these inspections. So you can also do a mid-lease inspection. You can do move-out inspection. So on those, you can store all sorts of things, make, model, serial number of all your appliances, which is great to have on hand. You can do the furnace filters and the batteries and all sorts of stuff. So there's a range there. Google Sheets is a great way to start off.
Yeah, I'm a Google Sheets guy with my maintenance log, and I'm kind of building out, as we talk about this and as I learn from Scott, I'm actually adding a lot to my own maintenance system. So for everybody listening to this, I'll keep you updated on the podcast and share some resources as we go forward on what I'm using. But cool, that's great to know. All right, so check the smoke detectors, the batteries, make sure they're still within their lifespan. Obviously, these are pretty obvious things. Safety, you want your tenants to have fire protection or fire alert and carbon monoxide alert. So that's one. So the next one is test GFCI outlets and breakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so any of your wet locations, your bathrooms, your kitchens, and even your garages, this pretty much is covered everywhere now. So each state has different electrical codes. So the electrical code gets renewed every 3 years. And then the states kind of adopt whatever version they're going to go with. Some states like Illinois go down to like the city level. So pretty much now you need GFCIs everywhere. So you just want to test those. They're usually monthly. Reality, are you going to test it monthly? Because that's what it's called out. Probably not. But it's just good to have. You could have a little outlet tester like this. This can diagnose issues with the 3 LED lights, but it also has a test button right there that's going to go ahead and test your GFCI and see if it's tripping. GFCI just means ground fault current interrupt. All it does is it monitors the two sides. It monitors the hot side and the neutral side. And it's expecting to see the same flow through those two sides. If you were to touch the hot side and now you're introducing a new path and you might get bit or might get shocked, well, then that would break that. And that's where the GFCI trips. It's like, oh, I don't see this path flow. Something else is going on. And that's where it trips. And that's how it provides safety protection. One tip, if you guys have 2-prong outlets, so if you have an old electrical system in your property and you're like, man, this thing doesn't have a ground, right? I want to update it. I can't get 3-prong appliances plugged in here. You actually, to code, can install a GFCI, get a 3-prong updated outlet, and you do not need the ground attached. That does meet code. It's very confusing to many people. But I have done that in some of my properties to get those 3 prongs, even though I do not have, the modern wiring where you have the ground going back to the panel.
So it's a way to have safety on a per outlet basis instead of having the ground go all the way back to the outlet box.
Yeah. And even more so, you don't have those like adapters and all sorts of the stuff that starts happening when when you have that. Yeah. So
as someone who I have a love-hate relationship with old properties. I love them. They're my favorite. I love the old 1920s properties. I think you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
But man, do we have a lot of mechanical and issues to deal with, like that, for example. The wiring behind the walls sometimes leaves something to be desired.
Yep.
All right, let's keep going down the list. These are our regular maintenance items. So again, these will show up every single quarter. These are some of your more important regular things to do. Replace the furnace filters.
Yeah, so classic one, and also probably one of the ones that gets overlooked the most. So quarterly, you should be doing this. You don't need to get too fancy with it. I've talked to my audience online on like, what rating do you need? There's ratings in terms of how much particles it takes out of the air. What's called a MERV 8, MERV 8 is perfectly fine. You probably should not be putting in the filters that you literally can see through. They just have some fibers like mishmashed, and they're super flexible and flimsy. I don't recommend those. Do recommend a MERV 8. And depending on what kind of properties you have, you might be able to kind of talk your tenants into changing those out. It's pretty easy. And why I say that is you can sign up through Amazon or Lowe's, and you can get a subscription going. So you can get a subscription that's dropped off to the address. It's a great reminder for you. When it shows up, swap it out.
And I've had some tenants who do that. I've had others where I just knew it wasn't going to happen. And most of the time I knew it wasn't going to happen. So we have student rentals, for example, we're changing the filters out. We're not asking them to do that. We have some single family houses though, where somebody stays 5 or 10 years, and they have, you can even test it out. Like if they have their own toolbox in the garage, all right, there we go. We got somebody who can do this. But yeah, the other thing I'll say just about these quarterly inspections, this is something I did not used to do, and I'm trying to do them more often. We at least have an annual inspection. It's been hard with getting our operations up to be able to do this, but our property managers are going out every quarter now. And so I'm much more hands off. Scott and I have different approaches, which is cool just to share. There's different ways to do this. But I'm getting my property managers on a schedule, and they're going and doing the quarterly inspection, and we're in a student college town. So they hire students who work for them to go out and take pictures and just look at things. And so I'm adding some of these like ordinary things, like change the filters out. Here's the size of the filter. But I'm also using my contractors and their contractors and handymen to do a lot of this stuff. So it could be yourself doing it. It could be somebody else, but have been convinced over the years on the value of getting into your property more often. And these are a good excuse to do it by changing out the filter or doing some of these other things.
Yep.
All right, next one on the list, Scott, check the vanities and sink bases for water leaks.
Yes, the notorious water leaks. So I've had to change out many sink bases and vanities because the bottom's just completely rotted out and it's just beat up. The plumbing underneath your sink goes from a tailpiece to a P-trap, right? That makes sure none of the gases come back through that fixture. Those have like hand tightened nuts on them. They come loose. Maybe somebody's putting shampoo bottoms and stuffing a bunch of stuff back there and they're bumping it. So leaks are, prevalent in these areas, not to mention the water lines, the shutoff valves, the different fittings that we have. So something you just want to keep eyes on. It's something to easily overlook again, but you are going to have cabinet damage and additional repair costs if you're not looking at those. Additionally, something you might want to consider, I don't use these too much, but we have these like smart detectors now, pretty cheap, $15-$20. They're basically a smoke detector for your vanity base. If it gets wet, it's going to start squawking at you. All that's going to do is just have the tenant call you so you can get ahead of it and try to fix that. And there's water, you can get custom water trays for a 36-inch base, so you can do things that help you prevent that, help you prevent damage to that cabinet. But it is something you need to stay on top of, or inevitably you're going to have damage.
Yeah, this is an easy one. This one might be a 5-second little look under there that could save you a ton of money. And I'm going to add something to the list, Scott. I'm going to see what you think about this too. I had it just 2 or 3 years ago. I had a rental property where we had an almost brand new floor and lots of brand new things in the bathroom, and a slow leak from the toilet base just completely rotted out the entire floor. It was several $1,000s worth of work as a result. And we just didn't get in the house and look at it. We didn't find it. And the tenant I know they got their socks wet every once in a while doing it, but just never has told us about it. So you can't always count on that. It just depends on your tenant, whether they're going to be proactive. I always try to tell our tenants, we want to know, please, let us know. We're going to take care of the problems. Let us know. We're going to work with you to make sure everything's taken care of, but it's not always going to happen. So you have to be more proactive.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, the toilets with the wax ring, right, and setting on top with the wax ring, it can leak. It can be installed incorrectly. That plumber could then caulk the entire base of the toilet. If they caulk the entire base of the toilet and there is a water leak, it's going straight to whatever's underneath it. So if it's on the second level, right to your subfloor, then into your drywall, and it can cause a real big issue.
So we'll talk about the crawl space in a moment, but that gets us through. There's one more on the regular quarterly maintenance items. This is one that I added, being somebody from the South who has lots of insects and lots of bugs in houses. I added in insect control treatment for roaches, etc. You have any thoughts on that one, Scott?
Yeah, it's something I've slacked on actually over the year, but I have been bit on that. So I have a triplex and they're leaving out some food on a fairly regular basis. And we had a big roach issue. So as you know, when you have those multi-units, you don't want that, because then you're affecting all sorts of other tenants that had nothing to do with it. You're having to do, large remediation projects. It's just, it's something you do not want to get into. So it's something I need to get better at, getting that preventative, even in Illinois, right? The winters do kill off a lot of those guys, but with student housing, which we have here, that's something that can be a big issue.
Yeah, we had a really bad situation. For years, we did not do quarterly pest control. We just did it as needed, right? And then we had one, like you said, it was like a 4-unit building, and one person, before we could catch it, had left pizza boxes out and just trash bags in the kitchen. And within months, huge roach problem. We're in the South. There's very hot, humid, and it affects the entire building. And it was really, and the other problem was it's really difficult to get it kind of brought back under control. It took months to, they had to come back for multiple visits. So we just decided that a pest control company gives us a really good rate because we're doing multiple properties. Mm-hmm. They can come out 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a little bit of a hassle. But again, it's another trusted advisor who comes in there. And they also do a lot of our moisture control work, our pest control company. So if we do have a moisture issue in the crawl space, they can kind of check it out. So it's something we felt has been a good investment, and we spend money on all of our units to have them sprayed quarterly. Although we do give the option to our tenants, if somebody doesn't want to have the inside sprayed, if for whatever reason they think it's just not something they want to have inside their house, we'll do the outside spray and the crawl space spray, just depending on what the tenant, how the tenant feels about that. All right, so we made it through the regular ones. We're still in the spring. We're going to start rolling here. Home perimeter walkthrough. So you're going to walk around the home, check for foundation cracks, siding issues, holes around the pipes, and downspouts.
Yeah, especially on rentals, right? So downspouts and downspout extensions. Downspout extensions and mowers are like mortal enemies. They always battle, and the downspout extension always loses. So it always gets ripped off and it's just sitting there. So it's just something you got to stay on. It's something you got to check, and something you will need to repair. So it's downspout extensions are easy to repair. It's something if you get a guy that does it good, once, it's just something you can kind of work into your schedule. But if you're not checking your perimeter of your home, right, depending on if you have a crawl space or basement, you're getting moisture issues down there, that can start to get into thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. If you have a lot of moisture going to the base of your foundation, your sump pump's doing a good job, but it's working overtime, and then the sump pump stops. And you got a big issue. So just something you want, and it's a quick check. It's not bugging anybody. It's on the outside of the home. You give the tenant a heads up, super quick, easy for everybody to do. So it's really a low-hanging fruit.
So you mentioned, we mentioned in this item, like checking for cracks and holes. What's the reason you want to have a nice tight crawl space or basement with not having any little seams or cracks, or sometimes one of my big pet peeves is the cable company or whoever will come in and like drill a hole in the crawl space brick, and then they just leave this big hole right around the wire, and it's just like, oh man, that's so and it's sloppy and it's all over the crawl space. But why should we as landlords bother cleaning that kind of stuff up?
Yeah. So, I mean, one for weather sealing, right? So if you're in colder climates, but more commonly bugs, especially in our area, ants, right? So ants will find kind of their path in through the, where your gas pipe comes in or through where your AC lines come through. And if they're just not sealed up, it's such an easy path for them to come in. Not a big issue, right? But when it's on your rentals, then you're going to have to be calling somebody out there and inconveniencing the tenant. So you can address all that on the outside of the home. And again, no one's going in a home, super easy. You can even, whoever's walking that for you, you can have them have a can of Great Stuff foam, depending on the size, or my preferred is Dynaflex 230. So this is a DAP product, super common. Why I like this 230, it's because interior and exterior. So if you're doing your own maintenance, this guy's almost a one-stop shop, whether you do clear or white. So the smaller gaps I'm using a pure silicone or the Dynaflex 230.
Scott's got some great videos on that. It's actually very entertaining and satisfying to watch him seal up all these crawl spaces. So check that out. He's got some good videos on that one. All right, here's another one I added, Scott, because I've had some bad, expensive experiences with this. But as you're walking around the outside, check out your decks, especially your wooden decks, and the steps, and check for loose or missing railings, pickets, any damaged or wood or steps of your porches.
Yeah. So access to your home, right? So this can be, some of these are real liability issues. You do not want to be negligible, right? You don't want to neglect these things and then have some issues come up. Staying on top of your decks, usually you can get multiple lives out of a deck if you're actually paying attention to it. So you have your overall structure of the deck, then you have your deck boards, railings, and a few other parts to that. The backbone of the structure of the deck usually can do multiple lives. So even if the deck boards are going out. So something you need to check into, I use SPAX screws. That's SPAX. They have large, what they call power lags. So if you're needing to bring 4x4 posts back into the structure, they also have some nice general purpose contractor screws. They're torque bit. They just hold really well. So for instance, like I had 4 steps accessing one of my units. Some of those boards were loosening up. I just had some lags with me, set a few lags in there, and it just secures everything up for, multiple years. So 3 to 5 year fix. I'm very hands-on. So I put these things in my trucks, right? So I have my Milwaukee pack out system. I kind of build these things up over time. So now, probably 75% of any issues, I just have the stuff with me. Like I'm just ready to fix it right there. So it saves everybody time and headache. And when you're looking for that trusted advisor, maybe you found a handyman that's just awesome. Take a look at their rig, take a look at their truck, right? If they just have if they have a pickup bed with the shop vac and some tarps and 3 rusted hammers, I mean, come on, how good are they going to be at
take some pride?
Attention
they're not taking
detail.
pride in their truck bed. Are they going to be taking pride in your crawl space? Probably not, right?
Yep. So if they have, they have organized systems, and if you have an issue and they have the parts on the truck and they're ready to go, hey, that's really raising their competence level, and that might be something you really want to align with.
Agreed. Yeah, a good handyman for me has been really an important part of my team. So for sure. I want to, before we leave decks, so you mentioned kind of shoring up things, making sure the deck is secure, things are screwed in. The other thing I've had negative experience with, is not staying on top of treatment of the deck. So you have these wood surfaces. Can you talk about the lifespan? How long can a wooden deck last this treated wood, and then how can we extend the lifespan by treating it with a regular schedule?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you talk to Thompson's Water Seal, it's twice a year because they're selling you the product. Yeah. The best homeowners are doing it yearly. Usually I do it every other year. But to be honest, on some of my rental properties, I'm not staying that proactive with it. So you will extend out the life of your deck boards. Some things that's kind of a debate within the community is like taking a pressure washer and just blasting the deck boards. A lot of people say that's actually bad for it. It damages the deck boards, and now the moisture can now penetrate and then break apart the deck boards much faster. So I do like to do a light cleaning. So whether that's with a scrub, and there's deck cleaners, you can get all the dirt off, and then doing a nice sealing on that. I would say every other year, or at least do it like in a 3-year cycle, and that will extend out that deck for you. So you're not paying to get it swapped out and replaced. Now, if you get to that level, many times I bought a house and the deck looked terrible, and I was able to take all the deck boards off, use the structure, sure up a few things, and then just put the deck boards back on top. So just be a little critical if the deck contractor is saying, hey, that whole thing's got to be torn off the house. Get a couple different opinions on that, because you might be able to save a lot of money, because those large pressure treated, really the backbone of your deck, that can last. It's really out of the element, so it can last multiple lives.
This has been a big one. Decks have been expensive for me, and it's been really on my hit list to try to get better at. So a 3-year cycle is what I'm shooting for. We've been much longer than that. We were just like, oh, that deck looks old. Let's go do something, as opposed to having a proactive system. So we're trying to get on the 3-year system and track it. And here's when we treated it last. Here's when we put it on new boards. And I think it's gonna be a good investment of our time. All right, so we're gonna wrap up the spring here. Just putting down new mulch. This is one you had on your kind of homeowners list, but I actually do this at my rental properties, our apartments especially as well. Our houses, most of our tenants, it's in our agreement that they maintain the property themselves, so we don't do that on an annual basis. But maybe you could just talk about that. Is there any benefit to that? Is it cosmetic? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, with the mulch side, I would probably do a little bit more. I'd be like reestablishing my edge, and then I'm really curious to get your feedback too. I mean, weeds, right? Like if you're not staying on top of like that actual perimeter, that landscape perimeter outside of your home, I mean, within one season, if somebody's not on top of it, it can be out of control. And then it's a big undertaking to you actually have to take all the mulch out, have to take the plastic or the felt out. So it's kind of a big deal if it really gets overgrown. So it is something good to get a landscaper out there. And again, if you're purchasing right, or if you have that extra cash flow, that's something you're going to much more likely do. And then whenever you need to turn over your property, landscaping is looking good. If you ever want to sell your property, you're ready to roll. It does pay off in the long term.
It does. And so for multifamily properties, I build in a landscaping budget, because each of the people in the units aren't going to be doing the landscaping for the whole property. So that's definitely something. And so we try to work with our landscape person to get on the schedule, doing mulch, working on the beds. Houses are a little bit different deal. And one of the reasons I like houses are always a little tighter on cash flow anyway, because it's just the nature of the beast. And so one of the things I actually screen for in my tenant screening, and this is totally legitimate, right? You can have a list of things that you can screen for, is somebody who is into the yard, like somebody who's into the maintenance of the yard, and who actually takes pride in it and is like, oh, I'm excited. I'm moving from an apartment to this house. I can't wait to work in the yard. And then you just coach them up a little bit. And you might have to send a text every once in a while. Hey, look at the bed. When do you plan on working on the bed? Things like that. So the great thing about houses is they can be much more hands-off. But you do want to at least have that on your radar to remind them that, hey, this is how often you have to cut the grass. This is how often you have to do the beds. The mulch needs to come in the spring. And maybe you don't tell them up front, but then you just have some mulch delivered and let them spread it, something like that. That helps you, it helps them. But, it is a good thing to do for your long-term cosmetics and curb appeal for the house. All right. This has been good stuff. I love the details, Scott. This is so good. We're going to go to the summer. And again, we have the regular maintenance items we're just going to skim through, because it's the same things: smoke detectors, GFCIs, replace the furnaces, not the furniture, check the vanities, and insect control. But we've kind of spread out some of the other maintenance items for the year. And one of those is if you have a chimney. Now, chimneys are a big story. You need to clean them and inspect them. I prefer not to have a working wood fireplace in my properties. Like, that's something that we've kind of gone back and forth on. Apartments, none of ours have that. We have some houses that have them. I prefer just to have either a gas system or just say, hey, this is just for cosmetics. This thing doesn't work. And we have it like sealed up. We put like a metal plate and like, you can't use this thing. Yep. I don't know what, but if you do have one, let's talk about why you should do that, why you should have it inspected and cleaned.
Yeah. So I'm the same way, right? So I would recommend not having one, but if you're going to take that approach, or maybe you have an Airbnb, right? It's a higher end, you got hot tubs, you got all sorts of things going on. You want them to be able to do a wood fire because it's a cabin in the woods. Just understand that you can get a coating on the inside of the chimney itself, which can become flammable. So there's multiple different issues that can come from that. So if you have anything, whether it's really gas or especially if it's wood, you just need to be yearly proactive and get a sweep in there, get somebody that's professional. They can usually take care of it in a hurry for you, and probably not something you would really do too much as a DIY. That's probably somebody you'd be calling in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You want to be like Mary Poppins and that old Mary Poppins movie and jumping into the chimney. No, let's not do any of that, right? All right. So in the summer, I've kind of grouped in my own checklist that people will see here a lot of the things that it's going to be hot in the summer where I am. So like instead of inspecting the attic during the summer, I have my guys inspecting the crawl space during the summer. So I'm going to give you a few items in the crawl space, Scott. And the first one was most of the time the water shut off for the house. So the main shut off is there. And so you have a checklist item just to ensure that it functions as expected. So maybe you could just talk about what is the main water shut off? Why do we want to know where that is? And why do we need to know that it's working correctly?
Yeah, I guess to start off, do you know where it's at and what it is? I mean, right. So one time I had is a 3-unit. It was a bottom unit on a slab, but the main water shutoff was what's called CPVC, which is pretty brittle. And that literally snapped. It snapped. And so it was full flow from the main water coming into the house. And the student came home and he's like, there's water all over. And I was still working for Caterpillar at the time. So I was in like a meeting and I'm like, water all over where? He's like, the entire unit. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, there's like 3 or 4 inches of water everywhere. I was like, oh my God. Do you hear active water? Yeah, I hear something. Okay, I need you to, I'm walking him through it. So if you don't know where the shutoffs is, you can't give any directions. You might be faced something like that where you're driving over or calling somebody to drive over, and yeah, it can be a huge mess. So just knowing where your water shutoff's at, step 1. Step 2, is it easy to shut off, or has this thing not been touched in 10 years? And as soon as somebody sneezes on it, it starts leaking. Now you can't shut off the water. So if you actually have an issue and need to shut the water off, now your main water shutoff's an issue. That's not the time that you want to be looking at some of these critical components to your home. And if you have an old one's usually called like a gate, or more technically a globe valve, a multi-turn, usually leaking all over the place when you're doing it. That's kind of the classic. That is a preventative maintenance item. Go ahead and get a plumber out there at a convenient time and have him swap that out to a ball valve. Why you want to do that at a convenient time is because they have to shut the water off at the curb. Now, sometimes that's the water company coming out. So you can see how all this adds up. If you have a water leak inside, you don't even know where your main valve's at. When you find it, it doesn't shut it off. I mean, these things can really get into a huge issue where if you're proactive, you have a nice ball valve, you know where it's at, you know it's functioning. I mean, that can save you thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars in damage.
Big tip. People just heard this one. Who would have thought that the water valve for the house might be the most important thing you need to think of today? So I agree 100%. This is a nice, easy fix here, guys and gals. So fix this one. All right. So you're already down in the crawl space. If you have a crawl space or a basement, that's probably where the water shutoff is. Let's talk about some other things you might want to look at. Often the water heater is down in the basement. Sometimes it's in other parts of the house, but let's talk about the water heater and flushing the sediment out and just inspecting it and generally for any other problems or damage to the hot water heater.
Yeah. So this depends with age. I've actually seen some back and forth with plumbers on whether you should or whether you shouldn't flush it out. So there's usually a valve at the bottom of your water heater, and that valve is just that, to drain the water out of your water heater. Most commonly used when you're replacing it, right? You need to get that water out so you can actually lift this thing out of that basement. But it's also, you can use it for flushing. So over time, you can have corrosion, you can have breakdown of the interior liner of that water heater, and then sediment will stack up at the bottom. That's reducing your capacity. It's actually making it so a lot more gas needs to be used, especially if you have a gas water heater, because now you have like an insulated layer to the water, right? You have like all this metal shavings and rust at the bottom. So it makes it way less efficient. You or your tenant's going to spend a lot more on utilities. So it's something that you want to flush out. Try to get that sediment out. Try to keep it as clean as possible internally. And it is something to consider when you're swapping out a water heater. They usually come with the cheapest drain valve. And to be honest, those drain valves usually aren't very effective. So you can tell your plumber, hey, can you install a ball valve, like a full flow ball valve in that thing, right when they install it. So it's like $20 more in parts. And if they're already installing your water heater, now you got a great drain valve for flushing it and for when you need to swap it out in the future.
Good tip. Awesome. And for people like me who often didn't look at their hot water heaters for 4 or 5 years, when I had my inspector go in and look at it recently, like on some of mine, we found that there was rusted spots in there. We found that in some parts of the crawl space, they were, touching the dirt and they were getting corroded faster. So there's also, when I say like look at problems, there's those kind of things. Look for leaks, look for issues. Like if you can solve, like in one case, my plumber said, hey, this hot water heater, let's just go and change this thing out. It's about dead. It's on its way out. Let's do it before it becomes an emergency. And I went ahead and paid for it like right then. On other ones, he said, you might get 2 or 3 years out of this one. We could fix the leaks. We're good for now. So it's just nice to have a person who knows what they're doing get their eyes on it. And especially if you haven't looked at it in 5 years, like many of you probably haven't, have them look at the hot water heater. All right, so we're still in the crawl space of the basement. We mentioned this a little bit on the outside of the house, but this is such a critical thing that I have my person look at as well. Inspecting the crawl space or the basement for water, humidity, structural damage, and I also added termite issues.
Yeah, so similar to that exterior walk, right? You can see a lot when you start looking at the foundation, and crawl spaces get no love, right? So when you're down there, you're seeing all sorts of stuff going on. I know one thing in a former house, my primary residence, was I had adjustable supports on one of the main beams for the floor, and the floor would start creaking after a while. You'd walk to the bedroom and it'd be creaking and cracking. Well, going down in the crawl space and just making a small adjustment on the threaded screw would really cinch up, would really tighten up that main beam, and then you wouldn't have these creaks and cracks going on. So getting down in the crawl space and or basement, you're just going to see everything from the structure of the home, often the electrical, the plumbing. You're going to see if you have any drainage coming in, how the sump pump's doing. It's not a bad idea. If your sump pump doesn't run very often, which in our areas, ours do actually run quite often, it's not a bad idea to get a 5-gallon bucket, fill it with water, and then dump it into your sump pump pit to make sure that the float reaches the line, trips the sump pump, and the water exits the house. If your sump pump never runs, and then you guys have like a 100-year storm where it's flooding everywhere, and your sump pump's asked to perform for the first time in 10 years, the likelihood, it might not even be plugged in. When I've been in multiple crawl spaces, they quote unquote have a sump pump. It's not even plugged in. Yeah. It's just like hanging out down there.
Yeah. So there's some simple things like plugging in your sump pump. I've had dehumidifiers in a couple rental properties, which I have subsequently sold because I don't like having mechanical issues at any of my rentals. I want them clean and easy. We talked about that in the last episode. But I do have a rental property, the house we used to live in, that has a sump pump, and I'm just thinking about it now. We haven't checked that in at least 2 or 3 years. So I'll be checking that on my rental property. Other things I'll just mention in the crawl space. Often, if you haven't checked them in a while, any kind of humidity prevention measures, like having plastic, plastic surface covering on the ground can prevent humidity from coming up to the dirt and getting into the wood structure of your property. Just making sure the insulation is tucked up and neat. If you have a lot of insulation hanging down, especially for crawl spaces that are closer to the ground, that moisture will kind of draw that insulation down, and it's all over the ground, and the moisture is getting everywhere. That's a problem. It can cause mold and other problems. And just generally cleaning up the crawl space. I've crawled in thousands of them looking at properties. You can tell a lot about how well maintained a house is by how clean the crawl space is, believe it or not. If you got, 2 old hot water heaters that never got hauled off because they're just sitting off to the side, you got junk everywhere, you got plastic piled up. I mean, they're definitely not paying attention to it. Whereas a landlord or a homeowner who is really taking care of their property, the plastic is neat all over the ground and the crawl space. There's no trash and junk there. Things are organized. Their sump pump is nice and clean. So you just take some pride in it. I guess that's the main point. If you want to take pride in your rental properties in general and treat them well, the crawl space is a good place to start. And it's also a good place to pay attention to when you're buying properties. When you're crawling there, if you see it all out of order, there you can kind of tell something about how much or how little they're actually taking care of the property.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually got bit. I bought a house and there's a bunch of new wood. There's some new wood on some of the structural beams, 2 main structural beams that are holding up this 2-story house. Also some wood on the perimeter as well. And I didn't check it close enough. That was all covering up massive termite damage. So it looked like new wood, but it actually was just on the front side of completely, deteriorated and ate out original boards. So when you see new wood, something doesn't jive, you might want to start asking a few more questions, right? Like, why is that new wood right here, right? Like, this doesn't match. Like, these are all a certain age, and now this area, this structure is completely new. Can I have a little bit more information on that? And could I talk to the contractor who installed that? Pretty quickly, you're going to know if it's done right or not, because when it comes to that stuff, if somebody's trying to sell a home, shortcuts are often taken.
Yes, they do the soonest thing they can do, just knock it out, hope nobody sees it. So It pays to ask some questions. Crawl spaces, love it. They do not get enough love. I would agree with that, Scott. So we're giving them love in this episode, so that the crawl spaces out there will feel it. All right, I'm going to roll through the next 2. We've spent a lot of time on spring and summer, and these are really good items. Again, we're going to go to the fall. You're getting cold outside, you're getting ready for winter. We're going to have the regular maintenance items like we had before, but we're going to do some other things. For example, and this is a big one for me, inspecting your roof, gutters, and trim. So let's talk about the things you might want to check out with all of those, the roof and the gutters, and also just the trim areas, especially if they're wood around your house.
Yeah, and before doing, I don't want to miss the dryer vent. So
yes, forgot.
Yeah, good part. One, just checking to see if your tenant knows what the lint trap is a good start. I'm pretty confident that half the tenants in this world have no idea what a lint trap is.
Yes. Tell us what it is, in case people who are landlords don't know what that is.
Yeah. So this is your first line of defense, right? When you're drying towels and a bunch of fabric starts coming off, right? Starts coming off that towel. That is lint, and then lint builds up and can really clog things up. So your lint trap, every cycle is supposed to be cleaned out so that you can have a nice flow of warm air to the outside and your dryer efficiently works. Now, if your lint trap's completely buggered up and it's got tons of lint in it, depending on your actual dryer vents, the lines going outside. And sometimes these are the accordion lines, super thin foil. They snake up, down, left, right, and center before going out. Well, that's just a perfect trap for lint, and they will absolutely plug 100%. And sometimes they're off. To be honest, not uncommon for me to find the actual vent is off and it's just pumping in moist, hot air into your basement or into wherever. So just really good to get eyes on. And lint, take some lint outside, put a lighter to it outside and see how fast it burns. Like, it can be a big fire hazard as well. So something you want to be careful with.
Great. Yeah. I was going to mention the falling down vents. I'm willing to bet if all of you listening to this, go check your dryer vents. it's more often than not, especially if it's the cheap aluminum, you call them the accordion ones, those are the cheapest ones at Lowe's, those things disconnected all the time. I've started just asking my plumber or handyman just to attach the more rigid ones and take them to the outside and tack it up neatly in the crawl space or the attic, wherever it's going. Just to
run the dryer and go to the outside of the vent and make sure the hot air is coming out. So I've had it where it goes through a drop ceiling and it's actually opened up in the drop ceiling. And then when I was purchasing a property, I had an inch of lint across all the drop ceiling panels within a bedroom. So the bedroom above had an inch of lint. It's like, things you do not want in your property.
The dryer vents are getting some love in this episode as well. Good stuff. All right, so let's talk about roofs, gutters, and trims. Kind of like decks for me. This has been a very strong focus, something I think you can save a lot of money on preventative maintenance. But let's talk about some things to think about with your roofs and gutters and trim.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on your area. I mean, there's some areas where gutters aren't even super common, right? Where it just kind of goes right off to the foundation. In my area, it's so flat, you need to get the water away from your home. You need to get it away from your foundation. So gutters and extensions are very important. One thing on here is they can get plugged up, right? So what's the height of the trees around you? What kind of trees do you have? Do you have a bunch of needles? So that's where some gutter guards and different things can come into play. There's certain home products where for whatever reason, there's like 50 different versions of the same thing. Drywall anchors are like this, gutter guards are like this, it's a whole section. I use the fairly cheap plastic ones with little like diamonds and a netting on them. It's worked fairly well for my area, but know your area. If you have a bunch of pine needles, sometimes those don't work so great for pine needles. So you just want to make sure water's coming through your gutters, going through your downspout, also classically getting plugged up, right? And then going through an extension and going where you're landing that water where you want it. Again, we're flat. So if I have an extension, it's dumping the water out 4 feet away from my foundation. Well, do I have a negative slope right back to the foundation? I mean, that sounds simple, but the house I'm sitting in right now, massive. I had like 3 or 4 projects to extend 25 feet out, 4-inch corrugated pipe to get the water away from the home because the sump pump would run every day nonstop because so much water was along the foundation.
Yeah, I think I mentioned another takeaway earlier. This might be the main takeaway I would just say. If you remembered one thing about the whole maintenance checklist that we're going over today is water. We've done a lot of water conversations here, pipes, but the biggest issues I've had with rental properties and other properties has been not getting rid of the water and getting it away from the house. If you can, that's why gutters and these extensions are such a simple thing, but such a big deal because you're hurting yourself if you're dumping that water right on your foundation, and you'll have mold, you'll have issues with it corroding away your foundation. I mean, all sorts of stuff that can be solved by regularly making sure these gutters are working. I've had gutters that were falling down in some cases. The slope wasn't right. I've had, the anchor just came undone, or it gets plugged up with just pine needles and stuff inside the downspout, like you said. So just making sure those work, make sure that they're functional. And I'll add on the roof while your handyman or you are up there. Just I've for years I didn't do anything with preventative maintenance on the roof, but I'd love to hear what you think about this. But just go, if you have I have a lot of asphalt shingle roofs, but also some metal roofs. Just making sure that you're going around, making sure there's no nails popping out that need to be fixed, or no hole. Sometimes you had a fastener or a nail that was used to secure down the shingles, and that's got a little leak around it. It's kind of rusted out, and you need to seal that up. So my roofer can spend an hour, 20 minutes, I don't know, up there, and for the next 2 or 3 years, I'm pretty good on the roof, and then that avoids some of the problems of leaks and the shingles deteriorating faster than they would otherwise.
Yeah. So you can see the granular loss too. You'll start to see a lot of the grains in your gutters when your shingles are starting to wear out. Now you will always see some grains. So if you see little grains from the asphalt shingles in your gutters, it's not necessarily the end of the world. But you'll start to see the fibers in the shingle themselves. So you'll start to see less grains on top in the fibers of the shingles. That's usually they're starting to get, you're within the 3 to 5 year range there. Usually I don't see failures like just in the middle of a roof line. Usually it's like your plumbing vent pipe coming up and the boot around that, right? The boot doesn't have a good seal, so it's starting to leak, or the flashing against a chimney, right? So you're working with gravity, right? So if you had a brick chimney come up and you had asphalt shingles go up to it, well, water would be a huge issue right at that point. So you put aluminum flashing underneath the actual asphalt shingles to make sure that you're always flowing water down. Gravity is your friend, and then you're able to get that water off and not get to your decking material, which is your plywood. So if you don't stay on top of that, next time you replace a roof, you can have additional charges of, $50 a sheet for replacing the decking. So not only are you replacing asphalt shingles and the tar paper, you're also going to be replacing a lot of the decking because it's all damaged.
Been there, done that. Remember, yes. So you're inspecting your roof, you're inspecting your gutters, downspouts, things like that. Just recently I had my handyman do this and just cleaned all the leaves off the roof. We have a lot. This is one reason I don't like a lot of trees. I'm a tree hugger. I love going out in nature, right? But man, when you have trees that close to your rental properties and you have a bunch of them, this really increases your cost. Like we've had to, on our worst properties with the most trees dumping leaves and needles on the house, we have to go out there 2 or 3 times in a year. Yep. So it's something to think about when you're buying a rental property, to make sure you got to do that. Otherwise your roof's gonna have a lot of problems, but it adds some cost. And so we have a big difference in the cost we have on certain houses. The other thing I'll add, just when you're up there looking at all the trim and the roof and the gutters, is we have squirrels everywhere in those trees, right? And they tend to gnaw through some of the little eaves and the trim. And so just like you on the base of the house, you're looking for holes and cracks and places where things can get in. You want to look at the same thing on the trim around the roof as well, because they'll gnaw through there and then they can get in, and then snakes will follow them in, and you got snake. I've had snakes in the crawl space. I went up the stairs. It was a commercial building we had that we've since sold, but I went up the stairs to start inspecting this property, and you get up the stairs to the crawl space, you stick your head to kind of, where am I? And like 3 or 4 feet away from me was this big black coiled up snake, just like staring at me. I was like, almost fell off the ladder running back down. But it was chasing the squirrels into the attic space. So definitely something to check out. All right, so we're almost through fall. Let's get to the end of fall. Another really important one. We talked about the heating and air or boiler in the beginning of the show, but this is the time of year I like to have those inspected. So we put that in the fall. You want to add anything else about cleaning and servicing heating and air units?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to that. Again, I think it's at cost. So it's good to just leverage the $75 to $150, depending on what they're charging you for the regular yearly maintenance. And you do not want to be competing with everybody else when the demands for your furnace or your AC go up, because they're getting 10 times the calls. And who are you, right? You're just going to be waiting in line, and now your tenants are extremely upset with you, not with anybody else, right? So it's good to just stay ahead of it. And if you do that, you will reduce those type of issues almost 5x. Like you will reduce those basically catastrophic failures, swapping things out, whatever it is, you will reduce those literally 5x. So I think it is something good to stay on top of.
And the way my heating and air guys that we use a lot, they'll I think it was $150, and they'll come out twice a year. And so they'll clean the spring, they'll clean the fall. They got me on a schedule. They just let me know. To me, that's well worth it. And they know my unit, they know the parts, and they're getting that, instead of waiting to the winter, in the middle of the winter, it's really cold. We're getting in the fall and we're getting in the spring before the hot summer. So those are the shoulder seasons are the best times, in my opinion, to go ahead and get that done. All right, so we are now at the final thing in this fall inspection, which is ensure your fire extinguishers are accessible and the pressure gauge is operable, in the operable range.
Yeah, that's a good point. And know your local requirements, right? What do you need for what kind of unit? Chad, I guess question to you. Have you seen the new, basically disposable ones, right? They're totally sealed, no pressure gauge. Like, I don't know. Do you know if that covers the requirements?
I don't know. We've always used the ones that have to be recharged,
Yep.
and we actually we found a local service who would come in and inspect all of our fire extinguishers and give us a pretty good rate. And then I think it's kind of like the heat and air people. They'll then make money when we have to sell one, or replace it. I don't know. That's new to me. I haven't heard of those, but we've still got the old school. They have to green if they're in the little dials in the green, then we're good, and then you have to have an inspection tag on when they were checked last.
So something to look into. I think they have a pretty good shelf life. It removes that need for a pressure gauge, but I'm sure after 3 years or whatever, right, you need to swap that out. But that might be something, if it meets your local requirements, it might actually, one, safety's there, right? You have something, whether it's a grease fire or whatever happens, but you're not going to have that inspection. One less thing that you're going to have to inspect, and you just put it on your Google Sheet. When was that installed? And then you're just swapping those out during turnover.
I like it. Yeah, something good to check into. All right, so that's pretty self-explanatory. We're now to our winner part of our list, and hey, everybody, if you're still hanging in there, this is a marathon of a list, but I think this is good stuff. Like I'm getting so much just listening to Scott explain this, and we're gonna have timestamps in all the show notes, so you can go back and listen to this. This will be your resource. You can go back and check out each of these items, and as we update it, we'll give you another updated version. But the winter list, we have our regular items again, but we also have some additional things that are good to do during the winter. So we've got prune back your trees and shrubs. And I added especially the branches that are near or touching the house. I've had some issues with that. So what's your thoughts on that one, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually failed in this area before. One, touching the house, touching the shingles, touching the siding. Whenever you have vegetation that's close to vinyl siding, dirt, pollen collect, and then you start getting more of the mildew and algae. The green starts to form on your siding. So you want to cut back bushes. You want to cut back that vegetation, and then you won't have as much maintenance on that side. Where I failed was I had some pretty monster trees very close to one of my duplexes, and one of them was dying. So it had some pretty massive limbs that were dying. And I was up again, working my normal corporate job. I think it was like 5 a.m. I was getting up, and I have 28 missed text messages.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, okay. So I looked at it, and I mean, I'm still kind of like waking up, and all I see is like a picture of the corner of a bedroom, right? So the ceiling drywall, the corner wall, and there's like these big brown things like coming in. And I was like, what is going on? What happened? So the whole branch broke off, a very large, probably 1,000-pound branch, and limbs went vertical and speared through the roof, the decking, through the attic, and through the drywall into their bedroom. So, like, that was a fairly, thank God no one was hurt, right? But that tree was dying for a while, right? So yes, it was a huge cost, to get that back, but I had I think a patio table got damaged, right? Because a branch fell off a year earlier. So I should have taken that as the indication. Whenever you have stuff like that, where it's safety, maybe it's over a sidewalk, whatever it is, stay proactive on that, right? If you continue to build your real estate career over multiple decades, which you should, and you don't take that approach, that will come back on you at some time. And it's something that can knock out all the hard work that you've done. So definitely something to take into account. And when trees are dying, especially if they're massive trees, it is your responsibility to take those out.
Yep. Your big, beautiful oak trees, which I'm thinking of one of my house that has one of those over it. We had to spend money, the last couple of years just trimming up exactly what you're talking about, not only for the touching the house and getting ants and insects and then the branches on it, but for that exact reason. If there's just big, huge overhanging branches that are going to fall through the house, it can be a safety hazard, can cause damage that you don't want to do. And this is another aside, but we have a really big deductible in our insurance. So we probably have $3,000 to $4,000 deductibles. And so I'm not spending money. I'm not hoping that these branches fall in my house so I can get something replaced. Like I want to just go ahead and spend the money, get it done, and save your insurance for the real, when you really need it, when there's a fire or something actually happens. All right. So we are pruning back our trees and shrubs. Winter's a good time to do that, right? Because things aren't growing, and that's when you want to do it. Clean bathroom exhaust fans. So kind of like our dryer vents, we need to give these exhaust fans in the bathroom some love.
Yeah. So easy one though, because they're usually 2 spring clips. They pull out. You can literally take it over to the sink and clean it out really quickly. One thing to note too, if you're going to install a new one, just install like a super common one. So there's Bluetooth enabled, you can pump some music through it, 24 different colors, all sorts of things. And so there's a bunch of different makes and models. Stick with Newtone, right? Stick with Newtone, stick to the basic models. And why you do that is because if it's starting to squeak, if it's starting to make a ton of noise, the replacement part is literally one bolt. You undo one bolt, it folds down, you unplug it, you get the new one for $35, put it back in, and you have a brand new exhaust fan. So it really saves you. Don't go fancy. That is not something that's a seller feature. Go mainstream so you can easily service that. And every Home Depot or Lowe's has that internal part that you can swap out.
Cool. So you're checking for working for the parts. You're also cleaning it out just to make sure not all the dust and kind of junk inside of there. Do a quick vacuum or clean. And then just like the dryer vents, make sure your vent is actually venting outside the house. I've seen a bunch, properties you buy and they're just right up in the attic. You just go ahead.
That's a classic. I have also, most of those, the fancy ones have 3 different switches you can run into it. Like one's a night light, one's the exhaust fan, and then one's the main light. I wire them all together. I usually try to put them on one switch. So if they want light in the bathroom, they're also turning on the exhaust fan. So it kind of forces the hand, to like get the moist, warm air out as much as possible.
Yep, exactly. Because having a fan and not using it, you'll come into the rental when it turns over 2 or 3 years later, and the whole bathroom is molded up because they're not getting the moisture out of there. Awesome. All right, so we've got the vent for the bathroom, exhaust fan. Another one that I noticed on your list, but this was not on my list, which I'm really glad you had it on there. It's to clean your refrigerator condenser coils. So kind of like the condenser the coils on your heating and air unit, you need to clean every once in a while. Cleaning the refrigerator coils. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, it's just a twofold. One, you're going to actually move your refrigerator, so you probably have some cleaning to do underneath the fridge because it's probably a mess. And 2, if you're not cleaning those coils, it can't reject the heat. So it's more taxing on your refrigerator. And now instead of a 15-year serviceable life, it goes down to a 7-year serviceable life, right? So it's just trying to get a little bit more out of these larger appliances in our home with a quick cleaning. Hopefully you can align that up to a turnover. So it's literally a compressed air can in 5 minutes. You keep it as light as possible. Don't pay $100 to do this. Don't pay $150 to do this. Just put it on your cleaning checklist or however you're doing turnover.
I want to say that too about this list has taken a while to go through, but a lot of these things can be like a 1-hour visit, a 30-minute visit by your handyman or you, and you can knock out a ton of these at one time. If there's a problem, obviously you're going to take more time and have to fix it, but the point is like a quick little cleaning of a refrigerator. If you can get 7 to 10 more years out of your life of the refrigerator, by all means, right? Same with the heating and air. Those are $5,000, $7,000 replacements. A refrigerator can be $1,000 replacement. So these are for small investments of time and money, you're getting to save a lot more money on the back end. All right, so our final part of the winter checklist, and we might have to put off some of our other kind of periodic inspection items for another time, but this is the final one we'll go over here, is to inspect your attic for any water or structural issues. So something else I have my handyman do is just crawl up the attic, look around. So what kind of things might our listeners want to look out for, Scott?
Well, you're on the backside of the roof, right? So you'll start to see some of those moisture issues. It gives you a different view. If you're already doing insulation, if you're already doing any work up there, I do recommend having an electrician install a few simple lamp holders, right? And then put 2 100-watt LED light bulbs in those. So having light in the attic for any service person, any handyman, even you, if it's lit up, you can see what's going on. The likelihood of seeing any damage, of seeing any issues, and just being up there for longer than poking around with a little flashlight, it's gonna pay dividends. And usually it's such a small, amount to install that, especially if you're just piggybacking on another project. So same thing with crawl space. You're just not up there very often. You're going to see some things that are going on. You're going to maybe see some daylight where you don't think you should be seeing daylight. So that is a way to see if you need to reflash, need to get a new boot on that vent, or any number of other things that can happen.
Love it. Yeah. Once again, we're looking for water. That's our biggest enemy of a home maintenance, a long-term maintenance plan. Make sure that water, it's nice when you go up there and it's dry, it's clean. You're not seeing you're not smelling, a bunch of mice up there or something, although they tend to be up there. You don't see a squirrel or a snake looking at you in the eye when you come up into the attic, like I did that one time. So that's it. So Scott, we've made it through 4 seasons of home maintenance, gone through a lot of details. I think this is so helpful as a landlord. This is something I wish I would have heard somebody teaching me in the very beginning. I'm sure there was people preaching and I just wasn't listening at the very beginning. But just for anybody, if you're a brand new investor, you've got your first rental property, good for you for now thinking about maintenance, because you're going to be way ahead of the curve. You're going to be, might be something you have to learn if you're like me. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff and I'm still learning, but this is not something that is rocket science in terms of something you can't learn. You've got resources like Scott. You've got this episode you can go back and watch. And I would love just to wrap up this idea, Scott, any more advice on how to implement this kind of maintenance checklist, how you do it as a landlord, and any other advice for people when they're thinking about how to regularly maintain their property.
Yeah, I think getting on, if you can truly get it to these seasonal rotations, or even if it's twice a year, just showing up, and just even your tenant seeing people implement things like that, seeing people look underneath the vanity, that alone then multiplies how they take care of your property, what they're doing, how preventative, how they're thinking about these things. I used to work at Caterpillar, and we'd have these large assets like dump trucks and bulldozers, and just like we have large assets, which are our rental properties. And we always wanted to move any maintenance to planned and scheduled maintenance, opposed to unplanned maintenance, right? So Chad, you talked about the water heater, right? Let's go ahead and plan and schedule that water heater swap out, instead of having a water heater on the second level with a little pan to hold the water if it leaks, and then it starts leaking, and your subfloor and the tenant below, and it just really starts it starts to be a huge issue. So go ahead and move as much as you can to that planned maintenance coming from your actual inspections. And whether you're doing that yourself, which I love to do, I think it's great to be there and get eyes on, because no one cares more about your properties than you. But I totally understand it if you're remote, or if that's just not the highest and best use of your time. But who's that trusted advisor for you? Who's somebody you can truly trust and build that relationship over time, and they're actually taking care of your properties and feeding that information back to you?
Agree 100%. And I love the Caterpillar dump truck, or corporate best practice. This is something that big companies who have big expensive assets, they do this. Like, if you have a utility company who has to maintain their utility equipment, like this is something that people who understand maintenance do. But I found for myself, and also a lot of other small and mighty investors, we just tend to overlook some of these things. We don't, the good thing about being a small and mighty investor who has 5 properties, 20 properties, 15, whatever the number is, we're not managing 1,000 units. Like, we can do this. Like, we can get a couple spreadsheets, we can get a checklist. You can download the checklist from today's call. And then sort of the final message I want to give you related to both maintenance and also just your overall rental property business. A big theme that I want to keep presenting to you in the podcast this year in 2023 is the idea of systematizing your business. I'm not perfect with my rental property business, but I would say a big part of the reason I'm in Spain and able to be here and have rental properties producing income, and me being able to still run them from here with just a couple hours per week, are 2 things. One, team members. So these trusted advisors that Scott's talking about, handyman on the ground, my property manager, people who can run the systems. But then it's also having systems, and systems just mean, don't like get overwhelmed by it. It's checklist, it's processes. And the maintenance is a huge part of what you do as a rental property investor. But there's also other systems, bookkeeping systems, which I talked about on a recent episode, acquisition systems, refinancing systems, all sorts of systems. And you start thinking about your rental property business as a set of systems and checklist, it gives you some control. It gives you a feeling of empowerment that you can do this, that this isn't an overwhelming, chaotic thing. It's something that you can be proactive about and control about. And Scott's a wonderful example of this, of implementing this. And I really admire what you're doing, Scott, with the maintenance. And it's motivated me to try to up my game from a maintenance level as a landlord. So really appreciate your feedback on this, and want to give you a chance if you have any other final thoughts to wrap us up here.
Yeah, I mean, another great conversation. I'm always happy to kind of jump into these and because I'm both sides of it, right? I'm fixing DIY, hands-on, but then also, growing a portfolio. And I think that's one of the best paths to financial freedom for sure. One thing just to know, so we talked about all this maintenance, right? So you're going to hopefully up your maintenance game as you go through and systematize that. But remember, if you are purchasing a property, it is notorious that the maintenance wasn't done. So just understand that deferred maintenance, right? The last 5 years, the 10 years, 15 years, they're wanting to pass that on to you. So just understand, if they don't have any systems, I mean, that's going to be easy to walk the property and see, but maybe you ask, can I see how did you guys maintain these? Did you guys have a checklist? Who was accountable? Can I talk to them? If there's no answers to any of that, just understand that you need more in your budget. You might need to raise that maintenance percentage and capital expenditure expenses for your first 5 years a little bit higher, because all that deferred maintenance, if you want to truly take care of your properties, that's going to come on you. So it's something you absolutely need to take care of in the underwriting of purchasing the property.
100%. Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest mistakes I see people underwrite on the underwriting, the buying part, is underestimating their repair maintenance expenses. They think they have cash flow. They buy this property that has a ton of deferred maintenance, and then, oh, wait a second, I'm losing $100 a month. So it's on the front end, great advice. Scott, if people want to hang out with you and follow you online, I'm going to have links to all this in the show notes as well. They can get this checklist that we're working on together. But where else can they hang out with you and follow along with you online?
Yeah, so we are just starting up everydayhomerepairs.com. We do have a forum there. So the forum is just starting off. So if you go in there and ask a question, you're literally asking it to me directly because no one else is in there. So if you guys have any questions on maintenance, throw some pictures in there. Let me know what you're facing. I'll be happy to jump in and help you out. We're going to be growing out that forum on our website. And that's going to be really focused on the actual questions and then upvoting what the best response is. But we also have a Facebook group, Everyday Home Repairs community. Now that's like 160,000 people strong. And it's on Facebook. So you can only imagine there's some good feedback and a whole bunch of other stuff. So
I can't believe all the maintenance advice I get on Facebook. What are you talking about?
All the jokes, bunch of jokesters out there.
I hear you, Scott. This has been a lot. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you again for your time. This has been a long episode, but I think this is going to go down as a classic. I think people are going to go back to this one. I know I'm going to go back to this one and hear a lot of the advice you gave, and look forward to reconnecting with you again on the next one.
Sounds good. See you, buddy.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Scott. We went a little long, but I hope it was worth it because we went in depth on all those different things in the checklist. So don't forget, you can download it for free. It's in the show description if you're listening to a podcast, or it's in the video description if you're watching on YouTube. And as always, I would love your feedback. If this was a helpful show for you, send me an email at podcast@coachcarson.com, or let me know in the video comments below the YouTube video. I'd always love to hear from you, whether it's feedback on this show or suggestions for future shows. That would be great. Let me know. And again, I want to remind you, next week we have another episode coming out just like every Monday. This time it's going to be on the legal side of real estate. So we haven't talked about this a lot on the show. I'm bringing on my attorney, and we're talking about some of the worst case scenarios. We're getting a little ugly here on the show, but I know a lot of us worry about that. What are the worst case scenarios in real estate? What can happen? What are the bad things? And we're just going to have a conversation, me and my attorney, about those worst case scenarios, how we might be able to deal with them, how we can deal with that risk and avoid those if possible. So Definitely want to listen to that one. It's coming out next Monday. I'll see you there. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.